And thanks, Ryan, for the introduction. So, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to speed safely. And before I get into the presentation, if you go to the booth on level 4, you'll notice that we've got the McLaren simulator. So if you want to speed somewhat safely on the simulator, come up and have a chat with us, and then we'll see how you go around one of the tracks. So Ryan actually gave this intro to give you a bit of context as to who I am. So yeah, I feel really old when I say this, like turn of the century, at a company called Dow Jones Tellurate. They were effectively they provide stock exchange, option exchange feeds into brokers, into financial houses, banks, so on and so forth. And I started there as a developer back in a long, long time ago. That company was acquired by another company called Bridge Information Systems. I then came into the .NET world, the .com world, I should say, and started working on a couple of .coms. One of them was Ubid. It was a precursor to eBay, in fact, before eBay. I think it's still going in the US, but no longer in Asia-Pac. And then I moved to a consulting firm called Symbiont. All of these roles are software development roles, so I was working in software development, predominantly Microsoft stack. I think there's a lot of Microsoft here. And then I moved back in 2014 to a company called Pivotal. And it was a pivotal moment for me as well to see what Pivotal was doing, especially around the PaaS world. Having been a developer and looking to get code into production environments, I experienced what I'd call pain in getting that code into production, and then seeing what that particular PaaS provided and enabled from a development perspective was a bit of an eye-opener. So, and then back in 2020, Pivotal was acquired by VMware, and I'm part of a business unit within VMware, which is around the modern application platform space. And a lot of people don't know that VMware is in the modern application platforms and modern applications space. But it actually has been for a long, long time. Back in 2011, 2012, VMware's been working on modern application platforms for a long, long time. And so they acquired us, and so I've been working in that space, helping customers on their journey with effectively how to speed safely. How do you get software into production environments really, really quickly? I'm going to start by talking about one reason or some of the challenges in being able to do that. How do you like, what are some of the issues? And I'm going to sort of focus in on, I guess, 3 key roles. I think some other presenters earlier have already discussed some of this stuff, but just give you a bit of a flavor as to what we're talking about. So I don't know everyone's roles and positions here, but you know, there's sort of 3 personas that we've got in this space. You could argue that another one is the security. There's a security persona there as well. But if I think about developers, operators, and infrastructure, and I go back to a lot of the customers I work with, and in my experience, sometimes there's friction between all of these parties. Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes they work really well together. But there are some challenges in terms of being able to get your app, especially modern apps, into the hands of your end user, whether it's an internal end user or it's an external end user. And some of those challenges actually, so various reports, the state of Kubernetes, the developer velocity survey, there's all these reports that come out, but they all kind of point to a few things that, we start to see. From an ops perspective, there's some challenges around the adoption of Kubernetes, and there's a fairly high rate of adoption of Kubernetes. If I look back maybe a couple of years ago, the percentage that we're seeing on screen right now, around 65%, was a lot less. Like they were predicting this much. There was probably 32% or 20-something%. But it's changed. And so then some challenges come up from an operational perspective, in terms of the visibility and the control. And I think Neil may have mentioned earlier around, Kubernetes isn't easy. It isn't. It isn't easy. If you've deployed Kubernetes, it can be pretty challenging. And so, how do you approach these things, these challenges from that perspective? And then in the security side of things, from a security perspective, there's a lot of vulnerabilities that people are exposed to. The stats from the security report that we're talking about, one of the security reports here, 300% increase year on year in terms of security. And I think, if you were at the talk last night, or you've went to one of the workshops, there's a hell of a lot of work being done in that space to try and sort of like make it easier for people to sort of like deal with those security threats. The one that I'm going to sort of focus on mostly, and that isn't to diminish the other two, is really around the speed and the velocity that developers can deploy their software. That's the key thing. And so, it's pretty sort of evident to a lot of organizations that the faster that they can deliver digital experience, their digital outcome, their business objective through digital or whatever it is a huge benefit to them from a revenue perspective. Now that assumes that everyone that's trying to do this is in the enterprise space, but I'll tell you, it's also very relevant from a government perspective, right? Especially when you go through what we've been through in the last 3 years and continue to go through a little bit in terms of delivering services to citizens around health, like COVID, being able to check in, like how do you deliver those things really quickly, updates, all that sort of stuff. So really, really important sort of area to focus on. And so I'm gonna sort of talk about this in terms of like what we've seen happen in terms of technology as well. So this is just from yesterday, by the way. I took a snapshot from CNCF to see all of the projects that exist out there and all of the providers in terms of all of the technologies that are out there. And it's quite mind-blowing. There's a lot. And again, if I took this there is this new idea around how you make development or how you make developers really productive. How does a developer sort of achieve sort of real productive, deployment of software? Like how do they become really efficient? And so the questions that we sort of ask, and this is one that Spotify asked, is how quickly can a developer complete their first 10 pull requests? How many days does it take for them to do that? And so they measure that value is measured. And the quicker that they can do that, the better it is from their perspective. So let's talk about Spotify, because that's effectively what I said I was going to talk about, right? So let's think about Spotify. And I did say there was going to be a Snap survey, so I shouldn't forget. I was talking to someone yesterday, and I asked them, do you listen to Spotify? And they go, no. Apple Music. So I'm going to ask the audience, because I'm interested, and it's very hard to see with the lighting, but who here listens to Spotify or uses Spotify? Hands up, please. Wow, that's about 80, 90%. Yeah, okay. Who here listens to Apple Music? Okay, well, we can see who's leading the back there. Okay, who here listens to both? Okay, you guys are open platform, so I like that. Does anyone listen to SoundCloud? Oh, okay, there's a few, good. Okay, that's just out of interest for me. So Spotify definitely is something that resonates then in terms of your usage, and I do listen to Spotify quite a bit. So Spotify started kicking around mid-2000s. I think they actually registered in 2006, but traction sort of started a little bit later in terms of what they were doing. But when they started, they had a very small platform or a platform team, basically, serving up the things that were required by their engineering team. And by the way, when they were doing things, mid-2000s, things like Kubernetes and that CNCF diagram that you saw before, it didn't look like that. So they were like, working on, basically a lot of manual work to spin up, environments, services that were required by their application team in those mid-2000s. The team was around 4 people, basically servicing them, right? So, and actually, it's still 4 people. It's still 4 people managing, sort of looking after them right now. So, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. But from those early beginnings, this is from Spotify, so the graph. From those early beginnings, you can see this like amazing growth in Spotify, and the Snap survey tells me that you guys all know that, right? Because you're all using it. And they really increased in terms of the number of people subscribing, listening to their music, so on and so forth. It's like huge growth, right? At the same time that was happening, at the same time that Spotify was experiencing this growth, there's been this amazing technological, evolution. Like stuff has gone crazy. That CNCF slide with all of those technologies, that was happening around the same time, and it continues to happen, right? And what they were finding is that they were not able to move at the pace that the technology was. They were doing things very manually. It was all, and Kubernetes had come out, it's come out. They were doing it manually. They were doing a lot of, virtual server stuff. Like it was all very, very sort of basic stuff. And then all of a sudden, technology growth. And they've got growth, and they're bringing on engineers, and what they were doing was slowing them down. And the choices that they needed to make from an engineering perspective were very difficult because of the complexity that existed, but it wasn't like efficient. They were really slow. Hopefully you like the analogy here because it maps to the McLaren. So anyway, so they were slowing down, and that was that metric of like how effective or how productive a developer or development team was becoming was like it was blowing out of the water. And they needed to do something about it because at the end of the day, with that kind of growth that they were looking at, they don't want to be running slow. They don't want to be delivering like the new playlist service or the new, way that you can, sign up for something. They don't want to be doing that slowly. They want to be doing it quickly. They want to be able to deal with the feedback that they're getting from their consumers or the customers really, really quickly, much like this McLaren moving fast. So what did they do? That 4-man platform team, and if you're into Netflix, the movie or the series The Platform is out soon, so have a look. The platform team did what I suggest anyone who works in platform engineering should do. They went out and they spoke to the people that they were servicing. You'd be surprised at how many people don't do that. But they went out and spoke to them, and they found a few things out. There were some statements made. It was way too complex. There were way too many tools, way too many choice. Like it was very difficult, and the technology's moved on, and it's super difficult for us to get started. Okay? There's a lot of context switching. I'm going into hyperscaler A, and then I've got to go to hyperscaler B, and there's a tool there and a UI there, and it's all very difficult. There's a lot of context switching. That's slowing us down. So statements made. Then there was a lot of questions. Which tool is the right tool? Cognitive, like sort of dissident, hang on, which one should I pick here? Should I do this? That slows you down. What's already out there? What services are already out there? What have we already developed as a team? And you got to think about what Spotify started in Sweden. They had some people in New York, but then as they grew, they had distributed teams all over the place, and they were all building services, right? So what's out there? There's this array of stuff. Like, what are we doing? And then documentation. Like, is that API documented? Can I find out what that? How do I find this stuff out? So they really got a lot of information from that. And there was a few other things, but these were kind of key things that team who serviced this group, this large, cohort of development teams sort of found out. And from that, a reference to New Zealand in the Lord of the Rings, but no, they didn't actually look for one ring, but they actually looked at building a single platform for developers and developer experience. And they called it Backstage. And that's the crux of this thing. Has anyone heard of Backstage? Good. Some people I spoke to recently, anyway. And what was Backstage, basically? It was effectively an internal portal that allowed their development teams to standardize, or not just the development teams, all the engineering teams within the organization to standardize, create pipelines to deploy to any Kubernetes example, and make that available to others to use, and embed security and do all sorts of wonderful things. They also made it so that it was possible to discover services. So you register a service, you make it visible, and then others can consume it and use it and find out the doco behind the service. They also provided this thing which was like around the idea of how do we get started quickly and remove some of the concerns of development teams or developers when they had to make choice. Why don't we create starter templates? What a great idea. I'll create a starter template. I need to create a Node.js app. Let me click on the starter template. Everything gets created for me. Git repo. I've got like the name of the project, everything gets created and it's ready to go. Hooks it up to the correct pipeline that I need to use to deploy that. Potentially I choose the location that it needs to get deployed to. Amazing. When they did all of this, they also made Backstage a pluggable architecture. So effectively, any engineering team could go in and create any other component, any service, whatever needed to be done. They could extend it as well. It was an extendable platform. And when they realized what they'd done, as is Spotify's approach, they open sourced it. So I think it was open sourced around 2018, but don't quote me on that, right? And when they open sourced it, Spotify, with about 50 teams, had already developed a bunch of plugins, about 100. Since open sourcing, I think there's over 150, right? And that open sourcing happened because they were talking to other organizations and finding out that they had the same problem. Bunch of teams trying to push software or trying to get software into a production environment and struggling to get it in there and in a timely fashion, in a really, really fast fashion. And so they open sourced it. It's picked up a lot of traction since 2018. Huge numbers in the community have picked it up. You're probably wondering why I'm talking about it coming from VMware. Well, hopefully I can explain that at the end if you give me a bit of a chance. So let's take a real quick look at Backstage. I'm not going to do the demo because to do a demo in what have I got 7 minutes is not feasible. But I will show you some screens, and I'm more than happy to show you some stuff if you come to the booth. That's not to just get you to the booth, but come to the booth anyway. So Backstage. I mentioned application starters. It's a React application, so client side, JavaScript. You've got a bunch of application starters. Automatically, there's a bunch that you get there. With those application starters, you can complete a bootstrap for a project. So as I said, repos, the pipeline that it attaches to, so on and so forth. You can manage CI/CD and Kubernetes and get visibility of the security, all in one place, because it is one portal to rule them all, I will say. And it's great in terms of exploration. So people go and register an API or register a service or a component or a plugin, and it then becomes available, and you can view the Docker. You can go to the Git repo to see the actual code base, potentially do a pull request on that if you wanted to as well. There's a bunch of things. And documentation is sort of built into the system and it becomes part of it, all right? So it's made up of 3 components, Backstage, just so you know. The core, which is the base functionality, and a lot of people in the community are adding to that base functionality so that it extends it further. The app itself, React JS, it ties together a bunch of plugins, basically, and when you look at those plugins, you'll see how they expose to end users who can then use it. And the plugins themselves, right? So, which is all the additional functionality. Like I said, when they open sourced it, there's about 100 plugins. Now there's over 150, and they keep growing. So, pretty interesting to see. This is a view of what the application starter might look like. This is just off an example sort of Backstage. If you go online, you can actually have a look at the demo, but it doesn't actually show you application starters. But like I said, these are all configurable. You can go in and create your own starter packs, starter templates. You can see there, I want to create a React app if you want. Off you go. These are the plugins. So these are the things that actually you plug together with your starter templates to actually deploy into whichever environment. But you can also do all sorts of wonderful things. Whatever it is. This is the internals of what a plugin or an accelerator, is what we call it, might look like. So, it's going to perform some source interrogation, might run some tests, might do some whatever staging and push binding to services, whatever you want. This is what they look like. And they sort of hook together when you start from the template, from the starter template, connect to the plugin, and then this executes. All configurable, not something that is you have to use what exists. As a platform team, as a team building this stuff for your teams, you can use all of the things that you've got and put them into to create whatever is unique for your own organization. This is what the API discovery sort of screen looks like. It's sort of just a list of APIs. It's all role-based as well, so if you're going in as a particular user, you see the things that you're allowed to see. So there's security built in from that perspective. This gives you a definition. This is using Swagger to show an API from a definition perspective. So there's a lot more, and as I said, what you're seeing from a navigation perspective on the left-hand side is all extendable. You can add more and more to it. It's up to you, totally up to you. So I'm sort of running out of time, but I'm going to quickly talk to you about, so remember this, the challenges. First one that I'm sort of focusing on is really about the developer productivity and being able to speed that up. But the other parts of it are really important. And if I think about what VMware is doing, and this is where I am going to talk about what VMware is doing, we have picked up Backstage. We are actually an active contributor. We are one of the, if we're not the second most active, we're probably the third most active contributor to Backstage. And we are using it in a product called Tanzu Application Platform, which is all about starting, iterating, collaborating on software that you deploy. The additional part that we're also involved in from a Backstage perspective is the plugins area, or accelerators, is ensuring that you're able to bring your own technology, your own investments to actually plug into your version of application platform, which is what effectively is Backstage. So what effectively it's doing is it's a separation of concerns between the app dev, the app ops, and the platform ops, so providing that. Enabling a lot of the shift left components, so with no burden to the developer. You don't want developers having to worry about all of these things that they don't really care about. They just care about writing code, getting it in the hands of their end user, or they should be. End-to-end intrinsic security is built in, but allows you to automatically sort of add and apply the ones that you need to add and apply from your perspective, what your organization requires. You might have some tools that you want to inject into your pipelines, and you can do that. Development through production parity and repeatability is pretty important, so being able to do that is super cool. And having that ability to extend the platform, so in a modular way, like adding more and more features within it. And the key thing here is it can be deployed to any Kubernetes. So I'm VMware, and I'd be pushing the VMware thing, but you can deploy it to the hyperscalers VMware Kubernetes. You can deploy it to your own. As long as it is CNCF compliant Kubernetes, you can deploy to whichever. And you can deploy to multiple if you want to, but remember, the single developer portal is pretty important in an organization. This is kind of just a sort of a summary. When we think about it from a VMware perspective, we're providing Backstage to really help the developers and really help the pipeline, that speed into the production environment. But there's a bunch of other things, and I know there's been mention around observability, cloud native service bindings, all sorts of other things that help from a security perspective, as well as the management around Kubernetes and various environments. So how do you sort of configure, how do you have a look at configuration? How do you audit configuration? How do you like look at policies and apply policies? These are all part of like what we provide as well as what Backstage provides as pluggable architecture. Right on time. How good is that? That's what they should do. So please come to our booth and ask me anything, and I'm going to finish by trying to say it in Maori. Kia ora rawo atu, I think, hopefully. Thank you.